Welcome, everybody. Greetings, Talvar. Greetings, Govessa. I have got a special guest for you today, Mr. Richard the Machine Siegler. How the hell are you, man?
I'm doing wonderful. It's been a lot of fun, kind of getting the early days of the 10th edition. Like every time I played 8th edition, 9th edition, 10th edition, all with Tau, every time there's a new codex, I'm always excited because there's always things that I want more of. And we've been lucky the last couple times where we've gotten a lot of what we wanted. And so 10th edition is definitely in that vein where, yes, some things were missed, but I think some of the things that were missed are easily filled in a data slate in the future. Whereas the baseline, like getting actual rules, detachments that are good, Games Workshop actually did a great job on that. So it was a very exciting time.
I couldn't agree more. You can tell by the big Cheshire Cat grin on my face, I'm ready to get my Tau on. And I can see the same grin in your face, and I know you're excited. So, for those people who don't know you, and who's this guy that Kyle's talking to, most people know you, but for those people that don't, who are you, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm Richard Siegler. I've been playing Tau since 8th edition, but I play a variety of mostly machine type armies or like battlesuit, Gundams. I like cool robots. And so if you want to check me out, I am part of the Art of War streaming team, so the Art of War 40K. And if you want to sign up for any of our subscriptions, we've got plenty of them, but our main one is the War Room, thewarroom.vhx.tv. There's a 3-day free trial, and I'm going to be doing tons of Tau content. If you're a Necron fan or an AdMech fan or Grey Knights, I also play those factions as well. So if you want a broad synopsis of all the good things and kind of skip the steep learning curve of 40K and get yourself into a great spot to start winning GTs and better, then check out the War Room.
Absolutely. And guys, you'd be an idiot not to. I remember meeting Siegler, I think it was in the days of me, you, and Brian Pullen, and it was
Yeah.
an LVO, and it was the time of the Triptide and Drone City. And I remember us all getting a picture together and being like, "Yeah, what's in your list? Drones and Riptides. What's in yours? Drones and Riptides." And we're like, "Yeah, boy, let's go."
Commanders are critical.
Oh yeah, the commanders. Yeah, and I think it was really cool. It kind of felt to me like it was a meeting of commanders. We had an imperial infestation, stupid dreadnoughts and things like that, and we were like, okay, so three commanders come together at one of the biggest tournaments in the world. How are we going to tackle this? Well, let's go. Commanders, Riptides, drones, and that for me, that's kind of like a little bit of my starting journey. I wasn't as well known as you two, but I was called the Siegler of the UK, and then when meeting you, it was a little bit of a fanboy for me. I was like, hello guys, yep. And then now we are effectively community leaders of this beloved faction, and I can't wait to see what we all come up with. And I know Brian's been off the scene, but I'm sure at some point he might just come back and just flex a little bit. I don't know what you think.
He might. I haven't spoken to him in a while,
Yeah,
but he still loves 40K. Obviously, runs Tabletop Titans.
yeah.
So I have no doubt that if he ever got the itch, he would come back and certainly play Tau because
Oh,
that's his favorite.
absolutely, absolutely. And this is one thing I want to touch on. It's one thing I love about our Tau community because you don't really see a lot of respective like leaders in their own little time zones are coming together. But with Tau, in the space of like a couple of weeks, I've been speaking to Jay at the Pantheon Studios in Australia. I'm now speaking to you from America. And it's just really cool. I think that camaraderie and that kind of like coming together is part of the spirit of playing Tau, right? For the greater good.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I think a big part of it is that Tau is a pretty unique faction across the game. It's an army that has minimal access to melee, and so a certain type of player is typically attracted to it, and those type of players happen to be very community driven for the greater good. I mean, literally the philosophy of the army.
Yes.
So I think more than any other faction, Tau has probably the most kind of tight knit community.
I couldn't agree more, and I actually love seeing it grow and grow. And I think there's also this running joke that I think if you're a Tau player, and I use this phrase lightly, but we've definitely been bullied for playing Tau, right? Oh, you're a Tau guy. Goddamn Tau, I hate Tau. It just draws us close together as a community, right?
I mean, I've like forced that salt on people with the variety of like crazy builds that I've come up with, and I don't know if you remember back when Pro Tabletop was happening, but all those games were streamed, and my deployment zone was literally all drones with a couple Riptides and Commanders, and there were like a bunch of memes related to that. So I like playing the army, and I like durable armies that shoot pretty hard, but they have tricks. And I think Tau has always been damage with tricks, and I like that.
Absolutely, and I think I was the butt of the joke of like, Kyle, when are you going to play a different faction? When are you going to play a different faction? Now, I have now outlived a joke for probably the first time in my life. It's like, I've been playing Tau now for 24 years. The joke has ceased because it's no longer funny, because I've outlived the joke, and I'm there going, yes, and now people fear me. They're like, oh god, it's Kyle, you're the Tau guy. I'm going, yes, good, good, let's go. So I think it's really funny to see that we're still sticking with the faction. And obviously you play a lot of factions, and you know, the reason you're called the Machine is because you play armies that are machines. So
I do love machines.
You do love your robots. So what are we going to be discussing today? So I think, without going into detail and getting in a whole like dispute and talking about the difference of opinions, I think what we wanted to do together, and we reached out and we were chatting around doing some content together, is that I think change is a really hot topic in 40k because it's forever evolving, it's changing all of the time, and nothing stays stagnant. And in my opinion, that is really good, because I'm forever an optimist and I love problem solving. But other people might think a little bit differently. They like running the same thing, and they don't have the time or the energy to keep up with change. So what I wanted to do is me and Siegler to come together and think, how can we help the community, especially within Tau, adapt to change, and give some of our top tips, and helping people maybe that are new to Tau and want to know where to start, and maybe for those veterans, and if you've maybe lost a little bit of faith because at first glance you're like, oh, this is not what I wanted, I wanted more detachments, etc, 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 we're going to try and kind of give you a different perspective and help you out. So Siegler's happily given his time to come in and join in the greater good piece of helping with adapting to change. So I've got a couple of questions for you to start off with, to really kick this off. So what got you into Tau? Where did it all start?
So I started playing as a kid back in 3rd edition, and back then Tau was one of the newer factions. And when I started, I played Blood Angels and Grey Knights, the old metal Grey Knights, the Demon Hunters. And my brother played Tau, and so he was the Tau guy. So played casually until like early 5th edition, and then I went to college. And coming back 8th edition, I started playing again, and at that point I was like, all right, which army should I start with? So I started with Grey Knights because they've always been one of my absolute favorite armies, and I built them up. And Grey Knights are a super easy army to collect, so I got that pretty quickly. And then I was like, all right, well, which other one? Well, maybe my brother will be tempted to play in the future again, so I'll start Tau. And so I picked Tau up, built up the army, and that's when I started playing tournaments. And so I picked Tau because at the time Grey Knights were one of the worst armies in the game. And I was like, all right, Tau are also not a great army at this point in 8th edition, but I enjoy the models. I want to have like the motivation to build and paint them up. So I build them up slowly, and then I just keep playing tournaments with them, and I get excited by the play style. And from there, I go from strength to strength. I eventually win the Nova Super Major, which is my first like GT plus win. So pretty good first one. And then from there, I win a bunch of other super majors. And then since that point, I've been playing Tau competitively in both 8th, 9th, and now 10th edition.
Yeah, you had an absolute explosion of performance, and it was so good to see. And, you know, some people might get jealous when you're kind of the Tau guy, and they're going amazing, like looking at the stuff that you did and then looking at my own and taking inspiration from you. And I'm sure it happened with us all. We're all looking at other people's success and thinking, so what are they doing? What have they figured out that I've not? And then, oh, actually that's a good idea, I'm going to adapt it to my playstyle, and vice versa. So we never really spoke then, but I was definitely paying attention to you, and I don't know if you were doing the same to me, but it's definitely kind of like interesting seeing how we all had our own different playstyles, and you definitely hit the scene hard.
It was like, I didn't innovate Triptide or anything like that. I started running more commanders than most people, and I ramped up the amount of shield drones to a ludicrous amount. but I don't like credit myself with inventing the playstyle. I'm sure it existed out there.
Mm,
But what I did was I played Tau as a pretty aggressive army. I started charging a lot of things with Tau.
yeah.
And that's what people weren't used to, is like aggressive, like being wrapped up by Tau, being tagged by Riptides. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
So that's kind of been a hallmark of my playstyle, is taking weird units without combat profiles and charging them into stuff.
Yeah. And I think we share a very similar passion for the game, which is when we are the underdog. I love being the underdog trash tier faction because then it's like it's a bigger problem to solve, and I want to do the shock and awe thing. Would you say that's pretty accurate for you as well?
Yeah, it feels much more rewarding. Like, I think it was similar for you. As you had mentioned this to me. The ninth edition Codex that came out
Mm,
was ludicrously powerful, and
yeah.
I could have went to a lot of tournaments at the time
Mm,
and just racked up free wins, but it wasn't super rewarding for me personally because it was so easy to do that a lot of other people got their scores elevated and started winning. Very similar to like Eldar in early 10th edition. It's like if you aren't winning events with Eldar, when are you going to win them? I mean,
exactly.
it's literally the best time to ever do it. So for me, that Tau Codex, like that, like short release time before the next broken thing came out, was kind of insane, and I didn't feel super rewarding playing it, even though it had all my favorite models. I had like Farsight in there, tons of crisis suits, barely any trash, just all killing people. It didn't feel super rewarding because it was just better than most things in the game. Whereas eighth edition felt really rewarding
Mm,
because Tau, struggled against chaos and all these other factions that existed, and it was really rewarding beating them. Like GSC as well. GSC was
yeah.
like crazy broken army, and I was able to beat like three of the best GSC players in a row to win Nova. Then you get to this edition. Tau had a pretty bad index and then got some points decreases, and it was been better from there. But it's a very hard army to play. Not many top players play it, and because it's easier to play other armies, it just is. And Tau has a lot of like harsh downsides in 10th edition, but they have some very strong upsides. And for me, that play style is more rewarding because I have to really think about every decision. So this is why I've been excited about Tau, because it's typically that way. You give up stuff, but you get other good stuff, and I wish more factions were designed that way. But Tau is usually almost always unique in being one of those factions that always has strong upsides and strong downsides. So you have to constantly be making figuring out the balance between those two.
Yeah, agreed. I think when I think back to the previous editions, one of the big success when we were the trash tier faction, and I remember a super major, I think it was Nottingham, and we were we didn't have the data that we have today, like on the stat check website and stuff like that, but we were probably like 25 to 30% win rate, and I remember getting to like the final round and this Custodes player, and obviously Custodes are either broken or they're trash, and they were broken at the time. This guy looked at me and was like, Tau, what the hell are you doing here? And I was like, let me show you. And that guy was super salty when I got a draw out of it. And I was just like going, how did that happen? And it was because I'd perfected the positioning, the list building, everything about it had its role to play, charging, stuff like that. Charging Custodians, you say? I was like, hell yeah. Like, it was just weird. And afterwards, we talked, the brilliant guy was like, just the way you were using that was perfect. And I was like, I have to be perfect, otherwise I go down in the trash. I have to have everything done correctly. And
Yeah.
it's so stressful, but I'm enjoying it.
It's funny because like that exactly happened. Like early ninth edition, the Codex, after the commander spam part, it wasn't seen as a particularly strong faction.
Mm,
Then you get the Drukhari Codex come out, and during that time, I designed a build to try and beat Drukhari, and took it to one of the frontline super majors, Atlantic City Open, and I was able to beat a bunch of Drukhari players, and they just couldn't understand like how is my broken army not beating Tau of all things. I even beat Anthony Vanella's Drukhari there.
yeah.
So like the player skill really matters, and Tau has always been one of the armies where if you are a really strong player with very good decision trees, you are able to take this army very far, even if it's weak overall in the meta.
Yeah, because I remember reading an article that was about it was like a philosophy of how they approach the game in itself, and nice and simple to summarize it. It was you imagine the game is out of 100 points, 45 of it is player skill, 45 of it is player army strength, and then 10% is luck. And it's that kind of philosophy that if say someone picks up a broken faction, they get 45 points, but if they're not practice with it, then their player skill with it's going to be lower, and then the luck. Both people have 10 points in luck, but if you're a player that's always played Tau, for example, and your player skill is 45, or let's just be modest and say 40, and then your armies are 20, and if they've got the same stats but in reverse, then you're both at a neck and neck playing field. So it was like really focusing on your player skill if your army's not strong, but then if you switch to a stronger faction but you don't know the ins and outs and perfecting that craft, then you're not going to do as well as someone that's maybe been specialized in it. So that really hit home for me, and it inspired me to continually innovate with what was considered a crap faction. So I really love that kind of philosophy of how people get into the nitty gritty and how they adapt to change in a volatile environment. So, speaking of the Tau journeys that we've both been on, what advice would you give to, let's just say, little Jimmy who's gone to his Games Workshop and like, I love battle suits, I want to start off. What kind of advice would you give? And think about specifically, you said that it's a unique faction in the way that it operates. So it's going to be quite frustrating at the beginning, but rewarding when you get into the swing of things. So what advice would you give to someone new?
I think most new players who look at Tau look at the big shiny guns, and they're like, okay, Tau doesn't have melee, they shoot. This army is about shooting people to death. And very rarely is that the case. Yes, you do shooting damage, and that's your primary damage, but it's not the most important thing that is about this army. Because usually Tau isn't the strongest shooting army. Usually it's other armies. They can be a strong army, but they're usually not like top 3 even, which might go again like counter to what people's vision of Tau is. But usually Tau isn't one of the most depth. They don't like table you in a turn or two. 9th edition Codex, that was a little bit different. But outside of that, Tau for the most part is about a combination of things. It's the combination of you do some amount of damage, you have movement tricks and mobility, and then you have defense. It's the combination of all 3 things that makes Tau unique. And for me, the mobility is the key thing. That's the thing that takes you up a level. So you can take advantage of the defense pretty good. You can take advantage of their shooting pretty good, but it's the mobility aspects. Those are the ones that take a good Tau general to a great Tau general. Yeah. And every edition there's been multiple movement tricks, but like right now with the Monka detachment, I'm enormously excited for it because it has a new set of movement tricks that are going to be extremely powerful even against top players, and that's where you can exploit your player skill.
So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you'll hear us say like movement is king and positioning, and I think if you get into the mindset of, let's just say, these top players or players that are performing very well, they're not looking at the raw data of this gun does this unit destroys this, it's going to kill everything from the units to the family tree to the world. They're looking at what tricks can I put in my toolbox to get board pressure, so board control, infiltrating scout units maybe, or advancing and charging, all that kind of stuff, and thinking about how can I occupy the board early and pressure for next turn, so what we call staging. So with Tau, what are some of those units that we could maybe say to a newer player, go and purchase or get? What would be your first 2 picks?
If I was like a brand new Tau player and I was starting the army and I needed the essential core, in my mind, at least if you're going to play, maybe not Retaliation Cadre, but certainly Monka, is Breacher Teams and Devilfish. And the reason is because for me, Tau is an army that doesn't usually win by big scores. You're not usually like, an orc player can show up, go first, and all of a sudden there's like they'll be at like 50 points and their opponent will still have like 8. There could be a crazy score differential. Tau typically isn't that way in nearly every matchup. It's mostly you're creating very close games. Part of that is the nature of giving up a lot of bring it down points, but part of it is also that Tau doesn't have too many things outside of guns killing your opponent if the objectives are out in the open to deny primary. Yet breachers open up being able to do it in a wide variety of ways, and I think it's the best way to create a safe score differential to try and ensure you win games. So I think in this edition, the Breacher Fish, so Devilfish plus 10 Breachers, is the thing you want to start with. And probably 2 or 3 of those packages is like the best. Those are the first ones I would build and paint up right now if I was playing Tau as a new player.
Agreed. And we just say everyone, we don't work for Games Workshop. We're not trying to put money in Games Workshop pocket. But one thing that is quite nice is I know there's been a few rumors and a few spoiler videos, but apparently the combat box is going to come with Pathfinders as well, and that would be my other unit that I'd say that look, you can easily pick up what they call the little box, the patrol box, and you're going to get some of these units in there anyway. So Pathfinders for me are really good because they build into not only speed, because they are quite slightly faster than Fire Warriors, movement 7, but they have access to infiltrating and the scout move. So you can start to practice the phase before the game begins, because you can infiltrate them, then scout move them to safety or be aggressive with them. And also you've got infantry bodies that can kind of interact with terrain. You can spot for your army, so you can get basically you can spot for 2 different units, which is going to really help you get used to that army-wide rule of guiding and spot, all that kind of stuff. So you kind of really want to bank into Breacherfish, like Richard said, and I'd add a few other units like Stealth Suits, Pathfinders. And even if you think about, you're not going to go straight to 2,000 points. Maybe you want to build slowly and paint them. So 1,000 points, you could easily fit some of this stuff in and then still have room for like a Crisis Suit unit or a Broadside unit just to kind of get a bit of damage in there, or maybe even a Riptide. So for me, mobility, focus on structuring your list for, like Richard said, primaries, Pathfinders then for the board control, the scout move, and then you've got a little bit of sprinkling of other spotting units plus damage, and that sets you up quite nicely. Characters, I don't know, what character would you start with first?
Probably the Fireblade. I think, at least if you're playing Monka. If you're playing if you want to play any of the detachments, I'd start with Farsight. But if you want to specifically play Monkai, I think the Fireblade is the first choice there. But Farsight is also very good in that detachment. But those are the 2 that stand out to me for like my play style.
Yeah. So I'd probably kind of
Also
go.
Dark Strider. Can't forget about Dark Strider. Like, you have to get those 3.
I was literally going to say the same thing. For me, I'd obviously start with the Commander of Flavor, and then either Dark Strider or a Cadre Fireblade. I mean, they're not presumably going to be the same points or roundabouts, so they're not exactly they're not exactly high in points. They're low, like Dark Strider currently 60, Cadre Fireblade is 40. Come on, it's not that much of an investment. So yeah, and then you can build the list around there. Usually as a philosophy, I kind of design my lists, and I'll ask you the same kind of question, but briefly I design my list in three ways. I have a primary, secondary, and tertiary. The first is my primary. I look at what are my tools to score primary or deny primary. Breacherfish, insert, done. Right, move on. Secondary. Secondaries. How am I scoring my secondary pieces? Tactical is very good for Tau because of the CP generation, and we are speedy so we can get everywhere. The third point usually kind of overlaps the second, which is the spotting units. And they can do actions as well. So for those people that are new to Tau, or even people that have been playing Tau a while, the wording is a little bit confusing. You have to really sit and read it. But in a nutshell, you can spot because you're eligible to shoot. Then you've not shot yet, so then you can do an action. Or, if you've got grenades, you can do a grenade stratagem, and then still action. So I've had a lot of Tau players that have been new going, I can do that? Really? And that massively changes their game, because suddenly they've been sacrificing their spotting units to do actions, but not spotting, which is a huge flaw in your battle plan, because you've wasted a resource. So, for me, it's so important to build that into your list. And then, you're thinking, hang on a minute, where's the damage dealing units? That's not a priority for me. That's my supplement, that the extra spice, the icing on the cake, if you will. So what kind of philosophy do you have? Is it very similar, or is there anything different about yours?
The first thing I'll start with is the terrain format that I'm playing on. So if I'm playing player placed terrain, I'm playing GW open, if I know the missions that I'm playing on, any of those type of details, if I'm playing in a particular format that has certain like FAQ rulings that could influence, for a while it was like, which units could go back up in reserve turn 1 and potentially come down. There's a lot of questions and a handful of gray areas in the game that could influence things. Ignore modifiers was another good thing, that was debated until the recent FAQ. So look at what terrain format you're playing on. Ideally, figure out which missions you're playing on, and then also look at the overall state of the meta. It's like, okay, Tau is pretty good into X, Y, and Z. But then these matchups over here, like for a while, it had been Chaos Knights. Sometimes Orcs can be problematic if they go first. okay, these could be two tricky matchups. How willing am I to over tech into those specific matchups? I'll be weaker into other ones, but maybe I'm weaker such that it doesn't have too much of an effect. Maybe it's like 5 points of weakness, but I was winning those matchups by more than 5 points anyway. And instead, I'm going to put extra resources into making sure I'm better into the armies that Tau can struggle with. So you could go for like a generalist approach where you're like, I could play against anything. I'm just going to write the best list that could go into most things. Or you could say, I'm going to really tech harder into these matchups and make sure that if I play them, I have my best winning chance, and I just have to outplay people in the other matchups. So those are some of the other factors in addition to the baseline that you offered there that I think about.
And I think that in itself is a natural plug because a lot of people don't really see or understand the level of preparation that serious tournament goers will do. And you've hit the nail right on the head with planning the terrain. I mean, I did something not different, it's something I've always done, but when I went to the LVO this year and did really well, I got through to the top cut when it wasn't really expected with Tau, but I went with prepared folders. I had the tournament, the preparation. I also laid out 5 out of the 9 player placed variants, and then even the TOs said in the final cut when they were looking after us very well, and hats off to Frontline Gaming, you do an excellent job in keeping us fed and watered and energized when it gets to that final run and you're like knackered. You went, you might have problems with placing all the terrain, and I just smirked and went, want to bet? And then I pulled out my preparation and got the player place done perfectly. But the thing that you said about looking at the meta, that is a choice, and you sit there and look at the data and analyze it, adapt, change, and that all factors into list building. I'm really glad you mentioned it because I'm pretty sure over in the Art of War you'll be talking lots about planning for events and preparing people for success and minimizing failure points. So honestly, for those of you listening in, you've got the link below. Please check them out because I'm sure you do a lot of that work in your Discords, right?
Yeah, for every single faction, not Tau specific. So if you ever want to branch out into other armies, we definitely have coverage for all of them.
Nice. So, let's get straight to it. What about our lovely veterans that maybe are a bit disappointed about the releases? And everybody is allowed an opinion, and it's not all doom and gloom. Some people are just on that fence and be like, is it good? Is it? I don't know. What advice would you give to our veterans out there that maybe lost a bit of faith in the greater good? How do we pull them back in?
Yeah, so first off, let's say this codex is worse than AdMech. It's obviously not.
Yeah.
Not even close. Let's say it was worse than AdMech. Even if that dark thing happened, guess what? There is still time for an MFM, which is going to happen when the codex actually releases. So that's the first pass on what they've released thus far. And because all the signs point to this being written very early on in 10th, possibly at the start, because it's not really taking into consideration any of the data slate changes that have been made. That's what hints at that. Then, they're probably more than likely to say, okay, well, this is Index Tau. We saw how bad Index Tau was. We understand that. We're going to, make this, we see where Tau has sat with all these points decreases. They've sat at a perfectly reasonable area. We're going to institute those. We're going to help the new units. And then there will eventually be April, May, another balanced data slate, which could have some more passes, maybe more FAQ things. I'm really hoping they change the battle tactic, thing, because it would really help Tau and other factions. But regardless, there's going to be multiple passes at this faction, and we've seen the scope of a data slate has expanded. So unlike in previous editions where you get your codex and that's it, you basically have that rough thing. There'll be some points changes, but barely, maybe only a couple units will ever change in those updates. That's not the case in 10th edition. The scope is much more expansive, and they're much more willing to change a lot of things at once. So even if this was the worst case scenario, which it totally isn't, there's still a safety net built into the edition, and we have many, many more codexes to come, so there's lots of time. So all of that's good news. On top of that, Tau in the Kalyan detachment, if you were really, really like that detachment, which personally I didn't, it's still viable. It plays slightly differently, but basically the same. And there's actually new added tools in the book on data sheets that help it to delay the opponent. So that's good news. If you were married to 6-man crisis unit and the Cold Star, a lot of top lists were already moving away from that. And the reason was it was super efficient into a single big thing, like a knight or some big Titanic thing, Lord of Skulls, but it wasn't efficient into what the top of the meta had a lot of, which is MSU. A lot of multiple small units. A lot of top lists have like 16 to 20 plus units. Sisters is a great example. And with that, 6-man crisis unit always is splitting fire. It wasn't the most efficient thing. Now, in the 10th edition codex, you actually have very efficient MSU units. Like all the crisis models that got split up have very good datasheet rules. And then you add the commander, they get it. So Tau plays 10th edition much better with this codex. And it has 2 new styles that are active in the key turns of the game, unlike Kaoyun. So there's less stress and less pressure playing that army. So I personally think that this is great news for Tau players. And because we have a really good foundation of rules, the data slate can change the things that are not ideal, and then we're all good. So I really love the position that Tau is in right now. This isn't fake positivity. Games Workshop isn't paying me to say anything, and I wouldn't accept that money because I want to say what I want to. So this is a very exciting time, and I think if you're somebody who's played in the past and likes a battlesuit super type of heavy list, well, guess what? You're going to be in a great spot because there's a detachment for you. If you're a Fish of Fury type of person who wants to play aggro and make the game all about points and damage early, you got a detachment for that. If you like playing the Patient Hunter style, the detachment still exists. And you don't need 2 CP Fire and Strike and Fade to succeed with that detachment. Like most players that switched away from the 6-man crisis weren't using it as much anyway. So I think Tau, more than most factions, actually have not only a really good foundation for data slate for their data sheets, but also they have a very good foundation for multiple different distinct play styles that reward different units. So overall, I think this is a great place. And if you're a new player to Tau, this is an ideal time to start.
Absolutely agree. And I think one thing I'd just like to add to that is that I'm very much into looking at data. Did it previously in my previous roles and stuff, and I think that now we're in a position where 40k has got a plethora of data sources, even the app that we use to record our games, the Tabletop Battles app. And I think if you're maybe looking for an inspiration to start afresh, just literally start again and go, right, have a look at your battle app data and have a look at your win rate. But not specifically the win rate overall, just the go first win rate and the go second win rate. And if you've got a better go first win rate, then guess what? That's kind of the Montcar way of playing, right? You want to get up aggressive and go, go, go. If you've got a better go second win rate, well, that sounds like a Kion player to me. But then you've got another detachment now that if you want to be more of a tactical player and go, I'd rather make choices when I want rather than in turns 1 to 3 or 3 to 5, then guess what? Boom, Retaliation Cadre, let's go baby, I decide when I want to use this stuff. So you've got, and then hey, look, if you like Angry Chickens and want to do Horde Tau, then the Kroot way is available for you as well. If you want to play Tyranids but as Angry Chickens, then we've got the answer. So you've got options, and I think for you as a player, look at your go first win rate, go second win rate, work out kind of what style you want. Maybe you're just bored of doing Kion all the time and you want to change. Maybe you want to practice your go second win rate if you go first win rate's better. Do it that way. Just come up with something fresh and honestly start to look at the combinations of stratagems and units. And I've played, a handful of games now with the new Tau, and those crisis suits are so fun. I actually played the Fire Knife wrong in my first couple of games. I'd forgot or didn't read that their ability just gives you full rerolls to hit if it's at starting strength, or reroll ones if it's not. I was like, yeah, that's an important bit of information, Kyle. Maybe you should have kind of read that. And then I was like, holy moly, missile pods, mwah, love it. So I'm inspired, and I know you are too. So, speaking of all of this, sounds exciting, but how do you prepare? I want to know, in your head, how do you prepare or tackle change in 40k?
So I think the first thing is you need to accept that being different is perfectly fine. Is whatever you had been playing, if it doesn't exist in the same way, it's going to be fine. There are going to be other options, but there's probably new ways that you can use that existing kind of thing that you were used to. So great examples is the Necron Codex. the warrior unit that infinitely revived and if you couldn't kill it, it would just spawn back almost immediately within like a battle rounds. That died. But warriors are still good. They're seen like 40 warriors are typical in a lot of hypercrypt lists. You can run them in a bunch of the other detachments as well. And it's still a good unit. Plays a different role. It's not quite as durable, but it does a bunch of things that are really valuable. Same exact thing for Tau. Rice's suits are different now. It's not as efficient putting a single strat like Stim Injector on 3 suits and a commander versus 6 suits that could have 6 wounds and all that stuff. But at the same time, now they play in a very different way that is extremely strong, in that you can get multiple good activations across your army, which is going to require a shift in list design philosophy as you build in more observers, more redundancy in observers. So even if the things that you really loved aren't quite the same, they're still going to be good. They're just going to be good in different ways. And that's the exciting part, is finding out how they're going to be good, in which ways, in which situations, in which list archetypes. And that's the really rewarding part for me, is going ahead. Okay, we got the rules, we read through all the rules. This is a different army than what I previously been playing, but it's okay. Let me try and experiment. And frankly, I've already experimented with a couple lists. I tried a bunch of options. Some things I really liked, some things I didn't like as much. And I've been, flipping between all the like corpus of things Tau have available. And so I'm getting, with the reps, with experience, with putting units on the table, you'll get more and more ideas, and you'll slowly refine those to be effective on the tabletop. So that's really where it comes in, is like, this is the mystery phase. It's like, it's not solved, it's not figured. There's a lot of options, there's a lot of things that could be good. And as the meta shifts with data slates and such, new things will become more viable, whether because the meta changes and now you want that tool, or because that tool is reduced in points or gets a data slate upgrade. And there's plenty of room. Even if something you really love isn't quite great right now, there's plenty of opportunity where it could be.
It's the perfect example to give for me would be like, I imagine us both like sat on separate desks, and we've got like a one toolbox, and we finally getting to the end of the toolbox. We've got all the combinations, and someone's gone knock knock, and then just dropped a load more boxes on our desk, and it's like, the problem has now not been solved. You have to basically work out all the different combos, and we're like, either you could go, oh, or yes, give me more problems to solve. And then in the last, say, 10 months, a year with the index, we've gone through up and down changes and points, and then we kind of have a balanced data slate every 3 months, and that shifts it again, and then again, but we still only had one detachment and one way of playing, so it was very limited. Now it's like, well, I got 4 detachments, and I still have the meta that's going to constantly change, the balanced data slates that are going to constantly change, new codexes are going to be coming out as well, whilst I'm still trying to figure out my new codex. So it's like a merry-go-round that never stops when you get your codex, and that excites me. But obviously for those people that maybe are a little bit frightened of change, or just like, I don't have the energy for this, then simplify it. Think about, this is my playstyle, this is what I enjoy. You do this hobby, whether you go to tournaments or local games, you do it because you enjoy it. So pick out the one thing that you really enjoy, and then do little mini solving puzzles. What do I want? What combinations and strategy? Just simplify the process. Don't overcomplicate it. And you can take inspiration by watching videos and listening to the community. But at the end of the day, do it for your own reasons and simplify it as best you can. And even for those people that love problem solving and love change, don't try and overload and solve everything at once, because by the time you've done that, there's going to be another one. But just always center it. I always try and center stuff around what I enjoy. And then when I get presented with something that's like in a tournament, I learn by doing. It's always learning by doing.
So there's an analogy for this, is 40K, say like an 8th edition, when Games Workshop was very lightly like balancing the game, not in any sort of cohesive, consistent way that they are now. The game was more like typical chess, where a new release every couple months would change the game, but usually not so dramatically unless the rules were crazy. And that way I stuck with my triple Riptide build for pretty much the whole edition. And that was the only play style that really was super strong, like enough to go into the other top armies. And at some point, like, that yes, it's fun to play my same like that same build that I liked and I'm an expert in, but also at the same time, I liked making like random tweaks to it just so I would play something different. Like I'd throw a Pathfinder unit in,
Yeah.
or I'd throw a couple 5-man breacher teams when those were available back in, just to spice it up, change it up as much as possible, and start getting some experience with different units. In this edition, they've done a much better job of making more of the game viable, especially Tau has a pretty solid internal balance. And because of all these changes that are happening, chess is, the chess version of 40K is more like Fisher Random or Chess 960, as it's sometimes called, where the positions at the beginning are changed. And all that preparation, all that memorization, like I know exactly how this matchup goes every single time, or at least roughly how it goes within like 80% accuracy. That isn't quite the case because so many factors can change. And now it's up to you, your player skill, your knowledge in a lot of different situations that's truly being tested, more so than your memorization of one particular list that can do this, X, Y, or Z super well. There's more emphasis on you being able to go into any different situation and use your player skill, your knowledge from playing Warhammer as a broader player and a tactician, and executing it with a Tau list in this case.
Couldn't agree more. And it's exciting times for me. So, I'd like to do something. So, when you got hold of that Codex, obviously you don't have to say when, but when you got hold of it, all the detachments that have now been displayed, what was the one that straight away you were like, oh, I'm going to go straight in with this one?
I was both excited about Monka and Retaliation Cadre.
Mm-hmm.
And for different reasons. One, the Retaliation Cadre is a rule that's active all the time, which is nice because it's what most armies have. And then on top of that, it's an army that rewards your opponent getting aggressive against you, because if they get aggressive against you, you'll all of a sudden get a ton of good buffs.
Mm.
And I looked at, like, obviously 1 CP Torchstar Gambit, amazing, 3.1 away, really good strat to have access to. And then the enhancements, there's some very good ones with Starflare and the Grenade in Turnarax. So I looked at that suite of rules and I was like, this is really quite good. But then I was like, all right, well, this doesn't reward breachers at all. The breachers are the thing that I have felt like allowed me to get the top 8 at WCW. It allowed me to, play a lot of the games against harder opposition and be able to pull it out. Like I played, 2 WTC caliber Eldar players, and should I win that matchup more often than not? Designed a list that could play it close every time, and maybe 1 decision, 2 decisions goes my way. But like if I played 10 Eldar players, how many of those games should I win? It's not easy. But with having said that, the key thing for me is that the breachers always allowed things to swing in my favor. And I think that because breachers don't get buffed by that specific detachment, it's slightly less exciting having played it, because I think most games are going to be pretty close with it. I still don't think even with 3.1 away, it just blows people away. And that's because to really take advantage of 3.1 away, you have to do tons of damage. And 3-man crisis unit, even with a commander, isn't insane amounts of damage. It'll kill a unit for sure, even if it's a pretty good unit, but it's not going to kill like 3 units easily. And that's the difference. Is like the Neophyte Bomb unit can get a whole bunch of buffs. It doesn't need an observer to somehow get in their backfield. It just uses the natural detachment rules and some stratagems and can kill basically anything in the game. And how really want to support those units. So I don't think that's going to be as offensive as it otherwise would be in certain other factions, or in Kalyan it would have been insane. But with the 6-man crisis unit being able to do it. But I don't think it will be in practice. Same thing with internal grenade racks. In theory, like I rolled it out a bunch of times with a unit, fly over mortals, throw a grenade, shoot, scoot back over to do it again. And on multiple times I rolled it, I killed the Catan from full down to 0. That's awesome, obviously. Not too many units can do that in the game. But I found like literally playing on the table, it was very hard to fly over things, certainly multiple times. And so I wasn't getting tremendous value out of it. It only matters if your opponent literally rushes directly into your area and you can very safely get over them and do all that damage, and you have to spend quite a bit of CP on that play. So having played those things, I have gradually leaned more and more on Monka because it buffs breachers. And I think breachers are the key to having a more consistent matchup spread, in my opinion. And so playing reps with the breachers and with my Monka builds, I felt really excited about that detachment. And so that's the one I'm leaning a bit heavier on in terms of innovating.
Well, perfect, because I actually look, I need a little bit of inspiration with my Montcar one, because I've looked at one thing I really enjoyed was deep striking crisis suits, and I know you can still do it quite effectively in Montcar, but I kind of started to theorize the retaliation cadre first. Excuse me, retaliation cadre, and I've got a list that I just tested, and I'll go through that after you speaking about. Choose a Montcar list that you've done, maybe something different that you did on the Goonhammer article, because I know you did some work with them and you presented a couple of options, which is really good as a staple. But talk us through a build that you've either got in mind or you've been working on with Montcar.
So I won't go point for point because I don't want to sit here just reading a list, but I'll like broad strokes.
Yeah.
I think there is a build in Monka that is overwhelming amounts of infantry and point scoring, kind of like Orcs do it, where you can actually just take fixed and score so many points while denying your opponent primary in the first 3 turns that it is entirely irrelevant what happens turns 4 and 5. And in that case, it doesn't matter that you don't have your army rule anymore. It's going to be perfectly fine. You'll still have like stuff to do damage, but it won't be like insane amounts of damage. So I think this type of build will revolve around like 3+ Devilfish, 60 Breachers, probably 20 Pathfinders. You got Dark Strider, and you run the Sunforged Crisis units, Farsight in one, maybe a Cold Star in another one. And it's all about forward pressure. It's all that you send the first layer up. They have to commit their anti-tank to try and blow up Devilfish. If they don't have tons of activations, your Breachers go behind the wall. Or if they don't, they go on the objective. If they have tons of activations, they go behind the wall. And you just overwhelm them with so much pressure that you're getting 15s or 10s on certain missions. They're getting 5s, potentially 0s if you turn 2 onward, if you spend the CP and they don't position properly. And the score differential that you can create with Monka is kind of insane, especially because you can pull off so much move blocking with Pathfinders and with the Recon Drone. So I really think that archetype will have legs, and it'll play in a similar vein to those threat overload type of armies, where it's perfectly fine if your efficiency is reduced in the late game because you've got such a huge scoring lead. And I think Tau can actually play this style quite effectively with Monka, because your opponent doesn't want to engage you when you have lethal hits on everything and you're going to have all your observers active. Like, they don't want to have to engage you at that point when you're at your most efficient. But if they do, you're going to kill them. Yeah. And if they don't, you score so many points that they're like, well, I can't come back. I had too much of a deficit. And I really like Tau being able to put an opponent in that type of position. It's the reverse of Cao Yun, where your opponent was always putting you under pressure and you had to find ways to mitigate it. You're doing that to your opponent, so it's a funny role reversal.
And it's a funny one, because it's like you're in a boxing ring for the entire of the index, and you've just been like holding out for like round 3, and you're just taking punches after punches after punches, and now you're like, I've had enough of taking punches, it's my turn, and so just going in and Montcar first 3 turns.
And you'll notice I didn't mention broadsides, I didn't mention riptides. Both of them play very efficiently in Monka. Both of them love lethal hits, flat advance 6. They like all the different tools that you can potentially get. But I think at the end of the day, the Riptides are very much I survive for multiple turns, I got my efficiency that way. Can't tell you how many times, like a game I won cleanly, the Riptides would do like 3 of them would do like 8 damage to a thing in a turn.
Yeah.
And then the next turn, they'd be able to finish it off. But it's slow damage. It's damage by, you don't really have the tools to deal with the Riptides. They're just kind of hanging out, getting buffed. They survive there, they shoot multiple turns, and they get valued that way. I'm talking about, if my opponent engages me, they are dead. That's the type of damage I'm talking about with the Fireblades, with the Breachers, with the Sunforged units. I want to be able to clean kill anything that comes into the middle, regardless of what it is, how durable it is. And I think that style doesn't really need Riptides. because it's not really trying to play into the turns 4 and 5 where Riptides have finally gotten their value. Same thing, broadsides can do this. You can scout move them, then you can advance them. You're not using that advance elsewhere unless it's on Farsight's unit. But at the same time, you get a lot of value from broadsides kind of hanging at angles and just staying alive. And they could fit into this. They could totally, both units can fit into this archetype, but I think there's a version that doesn't have them. And actually, it's mostly the bring it down points you get are from crisis units and from Devilfish.
A couple of Devilfish,
So,
yeah.
exactly. So, like, if you get overwhelmed and can't deal with those because you have to deal with all the breachers and infantry in your face, you actually might also score quite low there. And the addition of that is that the second choice is taking teleport homers. And if you glom up the center, they can't like fit there, so they have to get in your backfield. Dark Strider's back there. There's ways to stop it from happening. So I'm very excited to put that archetype on the table once I finalize a list I really like. But I've been playing the mixed style of bunch of Breacher Fish, some Riptides, some Sunforge, and I found that's been extremely strong as well.
Yeah, I immediately looked at the Montcar one and I was like, how can I make the Grundy maneuver more annoying? And I was like, so right now if I take 30 Pathfinders, Dark Strider, I could have 4 Devilfish scouting, and then the other 2, if only there was a way of scout. Oh, there's another. Oh, scout with those 2 Devilfish. So I could have, effectively, if you did go full on Breacher Fish, 60 Breachers with 6 Devilfish, you could have 6 Devilfishes scout moving forward. And if you're going first, oh my god. Just full send. And that to me, suddenly I was like, oh. And then I could have Farstalkers and then do the infantry thing and then redeploy. Oh my god, that's way too many infantry for my opponent to even look at and go, I've now got a headache. I don't want to play this game.
Yeah, I genuinely think that style can prosper in this codex, and we'll have to see it on the table what the final versions of those lists look like.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot more options than previously.
Definitely, and I like where your brain's at, and I went to a similar conclusion with the breaches and stuff. In terms of what I looked at was I really missed that kind of. I enjoy positional play. I enjoy kind of finding angles and deep striking and be able to react. So when I looked at the retaliation cadre, I was like, well, perfect. I've got an army-wide rule that is consistent, and I'm not forced to have to doing it at the end game or the beginning game. So I was like, all right, cool. Let's see what I could do with this. So I had like a list that I designed, and I've been playing around with it, and it was just based around 2 of the like I've got Sunforge, I've got the Fire Knife, and I went in with the commanders. So I had like an Enforcer with 4 missile pods and the Starflare system, so he can go up and downsies with his unit to combat his slow movement. And what's really interesting is that if you go second, you can do that turn 1, so you've kind of got a mini pocket of aggression. And I put in with a Fire Knife team with more missile pods. So I was like, cool, missiles, like the Tony Stark meme where missiles go off in the background and explosions. I was like, yes, brilliant. That's my commander and the crisis suits. Next, Cold Star, similar to what you were saying. On paper, the grenade thing's really kind of nice because you can on average do 9 mortal wounds if it all pays off. So I was starting to think about I could even rapid ingress that unit and then do it and then do the grenades and grenades and grenades. And then I was like, all right, well let's put a combination together. And I went with missile fusions on him. And then obviously I was like, well, put all fusions on him. Guess where he's going? Sunforge. Fusions, and more fusions. And then I thought, well, I can't stop there. I need another Cold Star. Let's put another Cold Star in with 4 missile pods. And then in another Fire Knife, I was like, this is cool. Just missile pod unit, teleporting missile pod, deep strike. I was like, all right, I'm starting to really enjoy how this list is coming together. I put Shadow Sun in there because I was like, potentially getting a CP back. I was like, that could be quite nice. And there's some really funny things you can do with Shadow Sun, especially in Montcar with Farsight. He could spend a strat for free, but if she's nearby, you can gain a CP on a 5+, even though you've spent nothing. So there's some funny. I thought, you know what, I'll put her in there. Probably not sold on keeping her. It didn't really come up much, but I did roll a 5+, and it was able to give me 3 CP ready for next turn to do the 3-inch and then the Torchstar Gambit. And I really agree with what you said about Breacher Fish not really fitting in. I took 1 because I'd be rude not to. I was like, I can't quite drop them because I love them. I took one Breacher Fish with a Delphish, Dark Strider, and a Pathfinder team. Took a stealth unit because, again, free rapid ingress, building the list around that. So I was like, I want to kind of have the option, and as spotters with the reroll 1s to hit and 1s to wound. I put in your 2 units of 2 Tetras, but then realised actually with the Fire Knife, I don't really need them. It's the Sunforge that want the rerolls. And I was like, could probably swap and change some of those. And then I went with, of course, 3 Riptides, because I was like, I need something mid-board to go, come and deal with us, and when you do, Crisis Suits are going to hurt you real bad. And I actually took the Burst Tide, one of the Burst Tides and 2 Ions, just to try it out, and yeah, he did alright, to be fair. He did alright, and I do love a Burst Tide, so with the extra +1 strength and the extra AP, I thought, yeah, this could work, I can see this working. But obviously, he was usually the first to die if they don't want to get shot by the burst time. You're like, God damn it. So, yeah, Riptides was my kind of core. And I think playing a few games and how it would change the list, I'd probably definitely drop the Breacher Fish and put in Crute units, actually, because I didn't have any. And I was like, should have had Crute rather than Breacher Fish. Yeah. So, yeah, I think the main thing with my Retaliation Cadre, I was enjoying being over here and then over here and then here. And with that Starflare enhancement, if you want to go in for that aggressive, I just want to wreck you now, I want the game to be done, you could effectively have 2 Crisis teams and the third one just turn up on a flank and go, you're all dead. And that is cool for me. So that's kind of like my list. Like, I know you've looked at the Retaliation Cadre, but is that kind of like a similar thing that you've kind of looked at as well, or?
Yeah, I ran heavier on the Sunforge.
Right.
But basically very similar conceptually. I tried out the Ghost Keels, and I agree. Like, I think the 30 Crute is pretty essential for that type of list, because you want to draw your opponent out first with some sort of nonsense. The Ghost Keel, it does draw stuff out, but it like draws a real commitment out, which is good. But at the same time, then you lose a 160-point unit. And I like to do it with like a 55-point unit, because if they don't kill that last Crute model, I stick you the objective, and all of a sudden now I don't even have to touch it. They still have to send something there. So I think that those Crute fit very naturally into there. And I haven't tried the missiles yet, but I love the Sunforge. They're so good, and like I said, the tankiness of them is insane.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to share from the community in terms of my Discord. They've mainly come from my chassels. So with your permission, I'd like to ask you a few, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
Right, so I think you've kind of answered it, but one person's gone straight in. How much do you value the Crute?
The detachment, or like the unit?
Crute. Yeah, just Crute. Not he's not put you under immense pressure and gone, what about the detachment? Just wants to know how you value Crute now.
I don't value Crute whatsoever. They are there to die for my Firecast units to survive. Like, that is plain and simple. The relationship between my army and Crute is very one-sided, I would say.
Okay, so stick your objective and die, please, is your take on this, right?
But if those Crutes survive and they did a good job, then I will reward them, of course.
Reward them by dying in your next game.
They're going to be on the campaign. They got to get out there. Get those binoculars in use.
Yeah, so I mean, outside of the Crute detachment, I think the thing we talked about on the other video is true. The strategic thing of just being able to make objectives sticky, and if they keep to a similar points, they're golden. They're a really good tactical choice. So
yeah, and fit into any detachment, which is quite nice.
It's pretty good. So this is an interesting one. A lot of people have kind of asked a very similar question. So for most subscribers, we're going to generalize this one, and it's basically interesting in how you foresee dealing with big stat check style lists, like for example 18 rates, and usually we would combat them with like 6-man Crisis Suit can go in and bam. So how are you envisioning the change, or how we would adapt to these stat check style lists?
So in turn, there's a couple stat checks out there. There's like those Chaos Knight or Orcs being an aggressive stat check. Then there's the like Custodes, that are pretty stat check if they run all the infantry bricks. So you have a couple options with Tau. You can move block as much as possible. Now, wraiths obviously can move through, but a lot of other things cannot. And so literally tying them up or blocking them from leaving their deployment area by picking whatever the main kind of path up to the objectives is, physically blocking it, is incredibly potent against those armies. Even if they get up like halfway towards the objectives and are just there out into the open, that is a massive, massive deal. So I think Farstalkers, Pathfinders, all that type of stuff is incredibly valuable now. And it was already very valuable for Kalyan because you needed it to survive with Kalyan. But now the power of it is your opponent still has to get through that. But when they do, you do insane more amounts of damage to them. And so like they might not even be willing to get that. Like they're like in a position, they're like, okay, well, my normal game plan is not going to work, so I'm going to play more defensive than normal. And that alone can help Tau a lot because you get the points advantage there. And usually once you get a good points advantage, it's very hard to table a Tau army when they're ahead. Because you don't have to, you can step back for a turn, then come up and make sure that they don't get a ton of like 15s at 15 at the end. So I'm I think that move blocking aspect of the stat check is probably our best play. Now against Necrons specifically, the thing about Wraiths is they really hate being tied up off of objectives.
Yeah.
And they can't punch their way through anything durable. So if you can get them into combat with like a Devilfish or such, or Riptide, off of an objective, they either have to fall back and then they do nothing and they're not pressuring any of your other units, or they stay there stuck in combat doing nothing, not on an objective. So they're going to fall back and you just get turned and then you bump them with a different Devilfish and you keep on going.
Recycling,
and
yeah.
That's the best way to play against Necrons, is literally slow them down in their half of the board so that they don't make the middle objectives. So that your damage output doesn't make it so that you're never relying on your damage output is one of the safety tools of Tau. Is you have damage and you pay a lot of points for damage, but if you make the game about movement and about positioning and you don't have to use your damage or you don't have to use it all, you are just in the driver's seat the whole time. As soon as you make game plans around, I have to kill these Wraiths now or they're going to score them 15 points and I'm going to fall behind, that's when you're already not in a great position and you have to find a way to put yourself back in a good position. When you're at the position of my opponent is behind on points and I still have my damage operational and not tied up, I'm feeling great. I'm in control of the game. Tau wants to be in control of the game.
I couldn't agree more, and it's actually lovely hearing you talk about how you're tackling these particular threats through movement, charging and stuff, because it's basically what I've been doing as well. I think the only Necron game I've lost is against Josh Roberts, and his list is insane, and it's kind of funny that he's now in charge of the balanced data slate, and he's got this broken list at the Goonhammer Open that basically scored 585 points out of 600. It's like, but he's got no Catan, so he's really kind of got in with all of the stat checking and the infantry, the weird stuff. I'm not going to go too much in detail, but it's a very clever list. But the Wraiths, yes, and then also their army rule, which you can actually control because you can just not let them hold half the objectives in Connected Core, and you're just like, okay, your Wraiths are hitting on what now? 4s.
Yeah, 4s, AP1, like strength 6, it's just not it for doing damage into anything durable.
Oh, and I charged you? Oh, so you can't do your strat for Dev Wounds, I think. But anyway, you just tag them up. You Riptides run 3 up. So, yeah, I think that's probably the best way to deal with those stat checking type armies. Custodes, I'll answer that one. It's something that I focused on in one of my subscriber videos that I'm doing within the channel. It's less about doing the damage to them and more about positioning. And it was a task that I set them to score primary points, a set amount of primary points, and it took around about an hour to come to the conclusion that they didn't achieve what I'd set out to them, but it was actually a move that took 3 minutes, which is just a clever positioning and knowing threat ranges and blocking and move blocking and things like that. So it's a very simple, fundamental one to kind of understand, but perfecting it takes time, and understanding the meta in threat ranges, movement, advance and charges, asking the right questions. And if you focus on all that, then there's no failure points, is there? You're in control, whereas damage is not always in your control because it involves you rolling dice. So
things can swing against you damage-wise. It happens all the time.
Yeah. So let me just load up a few other questions. So one of the questions is, what do you think Tau's role in the meta is now? And I think we could kind of answer that in two ways. One maybe from a singles perspective, and one in a teams environment. So what would you say in the singles? What do you think?
I think Tau is one of the more balanced board control armies where it is there and can go ahead and score a bunch of points in the center of the board, but is that's not the only way they have to win. They can kill you if you miss position. And so Tau is one of the armies where they're just playing a game of 40K. I feel like whatever matchup I'm playing, I can just play out a game and it'll come down to the movements and the decisions that I make in that game. I don't feel like Tau are going to have as many skewy matchups as before with the new detachments. So like Chaos Knights, Sunforge are amazing into Chaos Knights, and so are Breachers, and the amount of damage that they can do. So like Monka alone helps into that quite a bit, but then also like Sunforge and Retaliation Cadre going to Strain 10 is a big deal against that type of threat overload. So I think Tau's matchup kind of matrix is going to get a bit more even. Previously, there were some very good matchups and some that were very difficult, and I think that's going to even out a bit. I don't think Tau is going to blow away like tons of armies. They will have some very good matchups, but I also think the potentially bad matchups previously are much more manageable now with the new set of rules. I think there'll be a pretty even spread, which leads us to teams. When you have an army that can play into any matchup, it's a good army because you could play it into a tough list that's supposed to be getting 20 O's for a team and keep that game relatively even. Like Sisters kind of try and blunt a lot of armies. Then, on the other hand, if you're looking for, say you got your six and you're looking for the last two, and the last two need to be like killers. They need to be armies like that have tons of damage and are trying to create big score differentials. You might say, well, I don't think Tower are going to fit into this particular team archetype because they're not about getting those blowout victories typically. There's probably a list you can create where if you go first and completely move block your opponent in their deployment zone for multiple turns, you get a big differential, but you can't rely on that, especially if they fly and other stuff.
Yeah.
So with that, I think there are some times where Tao's going to be very valuable in teams to be able to keep matchups that would otherwise get out of hand relatively even and close so that it's drawish. And then there's other times where you might say, well, because Tau can play a game and will play a relatively close game into a lot of opponents, we need big killers, and so we'll instead go for this type of faction. So
yeah.
I think Tau is going to be relatively balanced overall. Some matchups will be advantageous, some will be slightly not advantageous. But at the end of the day, I think I'll be comfortable playing Tau into anything.
I agree, and I think we're going to be a disruptor in the meta. I think people are going to have to take a step back of their usual archetype of lists and go, oh god, now we have to, tech around these 3-inch deep striking crisis suits, and they're going to be forced to change their list. So we're going to disrupt the singles meta. And in the same fashion with the teams one, you hit the nail on the head in terms of before when you were talking about fixed. And I think Bring It Down can sometimes be a trap. And I know, obviously, we're not just going to have Tau listeners, we're going to have other, should we say, faction users listening into this video. And I think sometimes on paper, when they look at like my Goonhammer open list, I had 32 Bring It Down points. But in reality, people weren't scoring that. There was only one player that scored 20, and that was that Space Wolf player that was I don't know if you saw the memes, but he absolutely terrorized me in the seam in that event. It was like, oh my god, Space Wolves, run away! And I only won that game due to a capture on the outpost and a 9-inch rerollable charge. The guy was really good. But anyway, I digress. But the Bring It Down points was more about, well, actually, in reality, you're only going to get, 8 to 14 because my infantry is going to be so far up the board that you're never going to get to my Bring It Down points. And when you're thinking about teams and going fixed, cleanse, homers, and we all know that homers needs to be changed. It's a little bit too easy, and the secondaries probably need to be rebalanced at some point by GW. But at the moment, we play with what we've got. And in a team's amount going, I can score a minimum of 85 points, right? That's what my list is designed to do. Come and stop me. Potentially even more. You could maybe design a list to go 95 to 100, especially with your Monk card build that you were kind of touching on before, where I'm just going to get my points, come and stop me. And then you go in cleansing homers, because you can cleanse 2 objectives with 1 unit. You can, slowly trickle your resources and go, I've got my points. And in teams, that's really valuable because you can say to your captain, if you all don't like that matchup, I'll take it and I'll just score points. So I think Tau definitely fits in that, I'd say comfortably maybe 8 to 12 points in pretty much most games, because you can take some of the bad matchups for your team, but then sometimes you can squeeze out 12, maybe 13 if you're cheeky. Maybe you've got to block them in, like you said, and you can really just come back to your captain and go, there's consistent points, and use them as a defender-style list rather than a prey.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that role means that the army is just going to be in a good spot. It's going to come down to your player skill in that matchup.
Yeah. And I love the fact that, you and the rest of the Art of War are obviously focusing on teams because you've been doing really well. But also I think teams, in terms of the 40k community in the tournament, is way more enjoyable, and people are obviously banding together with their local gaming crew. They've all got their jerseys on there, and it's just a different way of playing 40k, and it's why I wanted to touch on it. And I'm glad that we're talking about the WTC scoring. And then obviously I would hope that you're coming to the WTC this year, Richard.
I am not on Team USA. I haven't applied to any of the teams.
Okay.
So
have you got any team events?
I'll be at a variety of team events, though.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ones coming up during the summer that I'll be participating in with Art of War, and then I'll probably be at US Open Tampa, and hopefully I'll be able to get a golden ticket to be at the WCW again in November.
Well, let's hopefully we'll see. I'll see you at Atlanta, because. And one of the questions is about, like, what... I think one of the questions was, what would you... What was it? It was about Legended. And basically it's like, which units are you most happy to see sent to Legends for the Codex, and why is it Longstrike? Because they know that you're going to bait me on this one, and I'm going to bait you right back. So, are you happy that Longstrike went to Legended?
No, I actually have the model, and he looks sweet. And like, what's the difference? He's a little resin upgrade piece. Like, and then there's a literal tank commander in the plastic sprue.
Yeah.
That could just be Longstrike. I don't know why he had to go. That seems a little silly. The one that I'm happy to see go is tactical drones, because I was forever going to be mad that they priced them so ludicrously high because they just didn't want anybody running a drone model.
Yeah.
And now you can't, and now it's just consistent. I don't feel bad about not taking the drones that I could take. It was insane. There were 70 points for like a couple gun drones.
I'm kind of happy that they went to Legend as well, because I was being baited into going to tournaments with stupid lists just to prove that I could do well with anything. And my Discord was like, right, we're gonna give you the next task of tactical drones. I was like, yeah, of course, whatever, I'll deal with the hand that you give me. And now it's like Legend, I'm like, secretly, yes, I don't have to try and make tactical drones somewhat competitive, because let's face it, no, not for the points.
On Shi, so I think the Games Workshop store anniversary model for 40k is a cool Tau ethereal with the elemental things. Why is that not just why are we doing that? Just make it on Shi. Yeah. Just make it one of the lore actors, because he had such an old bad model. Could have made an epic on Shi model and put that out there. That would have been hype.
And I think the one ethereal that I've always respected, and I know you love your Unvar, but for me it was Unshi, because Unshi also could have captured Farsight and sent him to the Tau jail, but he was like, nah, you got a sword, I've got a blade, I respect you. And they're like, they had that understanding, and now he's gone. But to be fair to Unshi, may he finally enjoy that vacation, because if you're a lore person and you love reading the stories, that guy retired so many times and went to a private island and was enjoying whatever Tau do on their retirement, and then just got called back to battle repeatedly. Now he's finally retiring properly. But it is sad to see him go. It is sad. Same with Longstrike, same with Unvar. It was just a bit of extra character flavour, and now it's kind of gone, and it's a shame, because I didn't really see why they did it. But nah, it is what it is.
It feels like they're just, it's a like corporate decision to phase out resin, rather than a rules decision that these don't serve a purpose, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, because I think Just understand. I think they did miss an opportunity, but I think we've got to understand the bigger picture of like this was decided, 9-10 months ago, maybe more, and now the game's evolved massively since then. But I would have liked to see some sort of vehicle detachment, for tanks. And then Long Strike would naturally fit in that, right? Or an ethereal style of detachment, or whatever you want to do. And then you could fit all this kind of stuff in. But I think they've missed the boat there. And I think in the GW, I don't know, if there's many expansions that they're going to do later on, that could be something that might come back. We don't know.
Yeah, I would have liked to see an ethereal detachment where you run a bunch of ethereals and the units within like 12 inches of them gains like extra bonuses.
I actually enjoyed. I mean, I know I talk a lot of crap about ethereals and be like, nah, I'm Farsight all the way and rebellious and all that lot because it's my nature. But I actually did enjoy it when the ethereals had like a list of different powers, like the Zephyr's Grace and stuff like that. It just added another bit of flavor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now for an ethereal who's meant to be, the leader.
Especially an army leader, not like leading a unit. He's supposed to be an army leader.
Yeah, and he just comes up and goes, sometimes I'll help you, sometimes I won't.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll give you a bit of extra resource. Meh. For the greater good? Sorry, what's that? It's our army thing! Oh, I never heard of it.
Yeah, he doesn't help with that. Like, honestly, he should be able to deserve like 3 different things.
Yeah. Just get it done. Like
take a unit within 24, no line of sight or something like that, because you're feeling it out with the faith.
Yeah, but apparently now they don't believe in the greater good. I think that's a GW, just give it the greater good rule. But I know in UKTC we're allowed to do it. But they told me
they've been infiltrated by Farsight Enclave operatives.
Absolutely. So I think I've got time for a couple more questions. Do you have any questions for me while I'm searching through some of the questions that my Discord have asked?
What's something that you didn't really run in the index that you might try now?
Ooh, okay. So
doesn't have to be like super like
no, but I've got a list that I'm going to be running at the Super Manchester, the Manchester Super Major, next weekend, and I've really enjoyed when designing lists this kind of theory crafting of I want to be really aggressive early, and I want to do lots of infiltrating units and just go send and have the conviction to place a certain unit 9 inches away from the deployment line and just go full send. And I think the go skill, I've kind of gone from at the very beginning going 1, 2, none. And then there was a gap of like 7 months of me just not taking go skills. And I was said in other videos, I thought that low knock was a bit of a crutch. And I actually would really like to bring the triple keel, oops, spoiler, the triple keel on the play. So I am going to dedicate some time in the Count detachment to really play around with the triple keel, loads of stealth suits, and just get aggressive, far stalkers, pathfinder infiltrating, and just go full send. And I want to try that. And cool. I like the no, and maybe I just go, no crisis suits, take away those automatic inserts and just go, nah. This is the infiltration cadre. I'm going to make up my own infiltration cadre and just have it with 18 stealth suits, 3 ghost skills, Shadow Sun, Pathfinders, Trailfinder, Farstalkers, and just commit heinous crimes. And that's what I want to do. But ghost kills, I love the model. I call them the Blossom Bros. I've got these blossom trees on them. All 3 of them are identical. I love it. And that's what I'm going to kind of commit to. What about you?
Well,
what about you, man?
What I'm most excited for is that when the Croop Box was previewed, Nick shook my hand and agreed to play a Tau Empire versus Kroot game at some point.
Right.
So whenever we get enough of those models built and painted up, I will be representing the Empire, the Firecast, up against his auxiliary army.
Right. Tell Nick, send me a message, and I'll help him with the Kroot love. Because I am literally making lists.
But I think it's going to be funny.
Yeah, you'll help him and then just, my crisis suits have got flamers.
No, is I have 60 breachers. In Devilfish, he can't kill.
Okay, nice. So, yeah, Nick's going to have fun.
Those Kroot are going to be used exactly how they should be.
Well, better hope that he doesn't do that thing that you're going to do to him first, and he just scout moves everything, takes 30 Firestalkers, and just tries to hem you in for as many turns as possible.
I'm going to win the roll-off with my infiltrators.
Yeah. If that goes well, yeah, fair enough. Shake hand, game done. But if he wins it, you might have to shoot some stuff for a couple of turns.
Oh, I'll be shooting.
You'll be shooting. Yeah. So, yeah, I think a lot of the questions we've kind of answered just by just having a lot of our kind of like casual chats where we've been talking about the different attachments. We've given you guys an example of a Montcar build, the Retaliation Cadre, talked a lot about the where Tau is in the meta, where it's going to be. And honestly, I think from my perspective, I've really enjoyed having you on board, mate, and I think we should do more of this going forward, and especially over the next couple of months. So I don't know how you feel about that, if you'd be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate being able to interact and talk ideas with you, and then experience another awesome Tau community that's out there.
Absolutely, man. So my last kind of final closing thing is where are people going to kind of like spot the Richard Siegler? Have you got any events planned up for yourself? Because I know obviously you've been focusing a lot on outside of Warhammer. I think did you finish your masters? Was it you were doing?
PhD, yeah.
Yeah.
I finished a little while ago, so I've been doing full Art of War since then.
Yeah.
And if you want to check me out, it's the Art of War 40K, and we got a YouTube channel where we put on a wide variety of freeview content, and then we have a subscription, thewarroom.vhx.tv, where you can find all the various content that I'll put out there about Tau, and we have content for every single faction. So if you're deciding on a new army, or you have friends who play your other armies and you want to help them get better, check that out.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you taking the time to answer some of my students' questions. And if you wanted to set up anything with me to help your students, absolutely fine by me. So just knock on my door and we can do more collaborative work together. But do you have any events planned, any singles events that you're planning to go to with Tau, or any team events coming up in the next 6 months to a year?
I don't know when this book is going to be officially legal. So as soon as it is, absolutely, I'll be playing it. But some of the team events might happen before that, so I might be playing other factions. But when I get to singles, I'll almost certainly be playing Tau, because I don't think any of based on the roadmap, none of my other factions are getting codexes anytime soon. So it's almost certainly going to be Tau time.
Yeah, Tau time, baby. Because I think, I'm hoping that they're going to be quicker than they have been, like with other Codex releases and getting the kind of FAQs and stuff out and the points.
Yeah, like who cares about Dark Angels? We can wait 2 months on Dark Angels, but Tau, no.
No, Tau we need now. And I think it's a bit of time for hobbying, but I'd probably hopefully have it like no later than end of April, please. Like, come on, I need it now. I want my fix. So I'm hoping that it might be something around like the 13th or the 15th of April, but we might have to wait a couple of weeks. But hey, guys, it is what it is. But I'm really excited. And I think one thing I'm really looking forward to is seeing us at different events, and obviously watching the internet blow up and be like, have you seen this list and this list, and they're completely polar opposites, or we'll be identically on the same pathway. So I can't wait for us to actually put our words and our stuff on paper to actually on the tabletop and seeing how it performs. And I'm going to be rooting for you, buddy.
I'll be rooting for you for sure.
Absolutely.
Good luck at Manchester.
Oh yeah, it's going to be fun, and it's going to be my last sign-out to Long Strike. I'm going to be shooting his railgun, and he's going to do the Lord's work like he did at Goonhammer, and then be like, and I bid you adieu.
Not a single invuln made against him.
Yeah. So what we'll be doing, guys, there'll be a link below with the 3-day free trial that you can take advantage of at the War Room. And obviously, Siegler's got plenty of stuff that he's already been doing and planning, no doubt. And for me, I'll have a similar sort of thing going on within my Discord. There'll be a link for 10% off of your first purchase. And more importantly, you can join the free community. And if you are interested in upping your next kind of level of performance and you want that little bit of extra assistance, please check out the different subscriptions available. And if you do need any kind of questions answered, maybe you're on the fence, I'm open to a chat. So just at Commander Puretide or DM me, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. But it's enough plugging. Thank you so much, Richard, for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on, and no doubt we're going to be talking more about the greater good in the future. So on that note, take care, buddy, and for the greater good.
Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone.